peaceful uses, is part of a project that we began at the Institute about 2 years ago, funded by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was focusing on atoms for Africa's development. Clearly, the nuclear debate more broadly is a very contested one. Clearly, here in South Africa, we've had a lot of discussions about nuclear energy and nuclear power stations. But of course, South Africa remains the only country on the African continent that has a proper functioning nuclear power plant. And the debate about nuclear energy, but also I would argue nuclear technology, is part of the broader debate that we're having globally about how we manage in the first instance, a just energy transition, and in the second instance, how we create a combination of energy supplies while reducing really fossil fuels, and certainly in the South African context, coal. And that, of course, has dominated the headlines over the last couple of months, both here in South Africa around Eskom, but of course also at COP26. One of the big issues and most important issues when talking about nuclear energy and nuclear technology is, of course, the governance superstructure, because that is critical. We know that from an energy perspective, nuclear can be pretty, it's not a fossil fuel, but certainly the ability to keep it safe and how it is governed is absolutely crucial. But there's another important dimension to nuclear, and that is, of course, the technology elements. When we're talking about issues of health and agriculture, all of these are areas where nuclear technology can become very important and can help us to achieve the objectives, the goals of Agenda 2030. In the African context, apart from South Africa, that, as I said, already has a nuclear power plant, there are at least 16 other African countries that are looking to establish nuclear programs, and those rank from right at the top of the continent, Algeria, Egypt, right to our part of the world, neck of the woods, Angola, DRC, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe. So really a whole gamut of it. Apart from South Africa, Egypt is the one that has progressed the furthest, having already begun the construction of a power plant. The presentations that you're going to hear today are focused on papers that we have produced over the last few months, the most recent papers that we have produced as part of this project. And the first one is on the African Continental Nuclear Institutions, and it's a review that of these continental nuclear institutions, and Professor Johansie van Wyk, who's the project lead on this program at Iaea, will be presenting that. The second paper is one on synchronizing nuclear governance in SADC member states through regional cooperation, and Mr. Kamen Velichkov from the International Science and Technology Center has written a very excellent paper in that regard, and he will be presenting some of the key findings of that paper this morning. Then the next paper is on next presentation is on international involvement in the African nuclear market, and that will be presented by Lazani van der Merwe, who's in the South African National Nuclear Regulator. And then the last paper is on nuclear science and technology driving Africa's development, and that paper will be presented by my colleague here at the Institute, Isabel Bosman. If you look at the program, we have the ambassador of Norway scheduled to make opening remarks, but we are having some problems with that, so I'm assuming that Yarik, and I will take instruction from you here, I'm assuming we should move on to the next item on the agenda, which is really to begin with the presentations. And if the ambassador is able to join us a little later, we'll insert her into the program. Is that, should we do that?
That is correct, Elizabeth. Yes, we are trying to get hold of the ambassador via different venues. So hopefully we'll do that, and we will still hear her remarks, although they might not be opening remarks. They will be intermission or interlude remarks during the webinar. So please watch this space.
And is Knox with us, our moderator, Knox Msebenzi from the Nuclear
We have managed to get hold of Knox Msebenzi, but he is struggling to connect. So it seems to be a technical challenge. So I'm happy to step in as a backup moderator, and I will introduce my dear colleague, Professor Johansi van Wyk, who will be delivering the first presentation of the day.
Great.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. So, colleagues, thank you very much for joining us. And as Elizabeth just said, apologies for starting late. We do seem to have some technical difficulties with getting hold of some of our presenters, and some of our presenters not being able to connect, hence the delay. But we are proceeding with the program, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague on the Atoms for Development project, Professor Johansi van Wyk, that will be delivering the first presentation of the day. So Professor Johansi van Wyk is a professor of international politics in the Department of Political Sciences at UNISA, the University of South Africa. And she's also the lead for SAIA's Atoms for Development project, which has organized this webinar. Professor van Wyk is a Fulbright alumna and the winner of UNISA's 2014 Leadership and Research Women Award, and her interests include South African foreign policy, diplomacy, and international relations, as well as nuclear diplomacy. So without further ado, I'm handing over to Professor van Wyk, who will speak about the key African continental institutions and agreements that deal with the governance of nuclear energy on the continent.
Thank you very much, Yarik, for that kind introduction. I would like to thank everybody for joining us this morning, and once again, apologies for the technical glitches. I'm sure that even after 20 months of the pandemic, we are still struggling to get some of these technologies on our side. But nevertheless, we meet at an important time, not only just after the conclusion of the Conference of Parties of the Pelindaba Treaty, but also at the eve, on the eve of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaties Review Conference, which is taking place in early January. I would like to give us a broad overview of where is the continent in terms of its nuclear institutions and nuclear governance. So if you allow me, let me just indicate what I want to do. I want to look at the status of the NPT and why it is important for the African continent, and of course preparing for the NPT as we go forward, and also how various continental institutions is empowering the continent to make use of the peaceful benefits of nuclear energy. So please allow me to start off with some aspects of the international legal dimension. Well, we know that African countries have signed up, some of them to the NPT since it has been entering into force in March 1970. South Africa has been, as you may know, the holdout state that only joined the NPT in 1991, which then, of course, paved the way for the continent to truly become a nuclear weapons-free zone. So the Treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons is important because it contains those three very important legs, or the so-called grand bargaining between nuclear disarmament, nuclear non-proliferation, and of course the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which the continent has strongly embraced as its strong support for the nuclear weapons treaty, and of course for its own developmental agenda. So there are still a number of concerns regarding the continent's involvement, and also from the continent. First of all, there is a prevailing view that the NPT as a grand bargain is really, in a way, entrenching what has been called by an Indian diplomat nuclear apartheid. There is a feeling by some African countries that there is a compromised position that they are in because of the inalien right of states to produce nuclear energy for peaceful uses comes under a certain condition. And that, you may know, has been on one of the main committees, has been a major issue on how the continent can move ahead. So it is expected that going forward to the NPT review conference, that the aspect on the peaceful uses and the inalienable rights will become part of the bargaining chip that the continent will take once the negotiations started. It is also expected that the continent will say, right, we have not had significant outcomes of the previous NPT review conferences, but if these nuclear weapon states are putting in their heels, then the continent say, look, then at least you must compensate us to develop a nuclear energy for peaceful uses, or at least contribute, as the treaty instructs, to nuclear knowledge sharing, but also to invest in the continent. So the divide continues within the NPT. A different story, of course, has developed within the context of the IAEA, which, as we see, has tried to be as aligned to the great powers and have a clear commitment to science and the use of the peaceful aspects of nuclear energy. And of course, the IAEA has been a very good friend to the continent in terms of sharing, investing, equipment provision to the continent. So at a bilateral level, the IAEA has invested quite heavily in countries through the establishment of nuclear power programs, through their so-called milestones approach. And we have seen through our research that countries such as Ghana is quite far advanced on this process. South Africa has had an integrated nuclear infrastructure review team. It seems like Kenya may be in future going there. And of course, we know, given the position where Egypt is currently in terms of its nuclear build program at Al-Dabaa, has of course gone through the milestones approach already. So we see that there is a commitment from the IAEA through also to visits to Morocco and Niger, that it wants to continue to engage with the continent. And of course, especially during this time of the pandemic, the IAEA, through its network, laboratories, etc., have made a significant contribution to the prevention, detection, and of course the screening, also in terms of the pandemic. If I can move on to sort of the third very important institution, this time an African institution with links, of course, with the IAEA, AFRA, which has this long name of the African Regional Cooperative Agreement for Research, Development and Trading related to nuclear science and technology. So here we see a small number of states, African states, 10 African states, that is involved in AFRA, also, of course, mediated through the IAEA. And AFRA has had some problems in terms of its operationalization. Sorry, that's a real tongue twister for an Afrikaans speaker, in terms of getting the work done on the continent. But it seems to be up on track with its fifth extension, its next extension that has been granted. And of course, it has, through its planning purposes for the new period, it has been able to achieve then that foresight, but also it has achieved significant milestones in areas such as radiotherapy centers in at least 18 countries, also more than 250 radiotherapists, medical physicists, nurses, and radiographers have been trained in Africa under the umbrella of AFRA. And these AFRA members, together with a number of specific national entities, have been able to achieve this. But like some of the other entities on the continent, it is constrained by finances, by, of course, the state of African states to contribute and to work towards the achievement of this. Typically, some other priorities are seemingly more important, but with the cooperation of the Iaea, there seems to be some progress. Now, I'm not going to go for the interest of time through the African nuclear weapons-free zone. Instead, focusing on the very important Commission on Nuclear Energy, established as, let's call it, the implementation agency of the Pelindaba Treaty. Now, Article 12 of the treaty says that states parties have established this, and of course there should be, and the entity, the AFCON's responsibility is to ensure compliance with the basic principles. Now, the mandate of AFCON is the reporting and exchanging of information, consultations, of course, reviewing the peaceful activities on the continent in terms of Iaea safeguards, to have some sort of complaints procedure for countries, and to encourage regional and sub-regional cooperation in science programs, nuclear science programs, and of course, promote the cooperation with extra-zonal states. And regarding the latter, yesterday, an agreement has been signed, cooperation agreement, MOU, between AFCON and OPANAL, which is, in my view, give us the opportunity and of course a greater justification for us speaking today. AFCON has placed great priority on human health, radio waste management, nuclear safety and security, etc. And under its very astute leadership of Messaoud Baliomer, an experienced nuclear physicist from Algeria, the Commission has really been able to position itself to have a strong identity and, of course, to work towards the goals envisaged in terms of not only its operational programs, but also in terms of the treaty. But we are, of course, mindful that, like the other entities on the continent, AFCON needs the buy-in of political actors, most notably members of the African Union. That they need to be aware of the very importance of the work of AFCON by providing not only institutional support, political commitment, but of course also resources, financial and human capital resources. So AFCON continues to operate. It has several agreements already with the IAEA, the CTBTO, Rosatom, and of course, the new one signed yesterday with OPANAL, and similar agreements are under consideration with the Central Asia Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone. AFCON is, of course, also cooperating closely with AFRA and the FNRBA, which stands for the Forum for Nuclear Regulatory Bodies in Africa. So let me then also explain a little bit about the role of the FNRBA in the nuclear governance structure of the continent. It was established in March 2009 and falls also under the IAEA's Global Nuclear Safety and Security Network. So once again, it reminds us of the important role that the IAEA plays here. And like the AFRA, it has also been facing a number of challenges, but the FNRBA has been able, through its new action plan, to focus on overseeing safety and security of radioactive material, to develop regulations for securing these resources, transport security exercises, working group meetings, regional workshops on nuclear security culture, and the survey of the status of radioactive material of members. If we can conclude then, we know that Africa is on the cusp of its nuclear energy age that aims to achieve the development goals of the AU and the UN. The continent's success regarding the peaceful uses includes the universalization of the norms and values of the NPT, the Pelindaba Treaty, as well as the New Band Treaty. The continent has already benefited significantly, but of course, there are still some work to be done. We would like to see that the challenges that these institutions in this governance structure are facing, that we as the epistemic communities that are working in this area, that we not only highlight the importance of this, but also that the recommendations that we have offered in the report on which this presentation is based. And here I have to quickly acknowledge my co-authors, Jarek Turiansky and Isabel Bosman, for their contribution. The three of us has made a number of recommendations. For AFRA, we suggest more cooperation with regional and international bodies for the enhancement of nuclear science and technology, to continue to promote nuclear safety alongside the developmental aspects of nuclear science and technology. And of course, to encourage all IAEA members on the continent to become. Regarding the Forum for Nuclear Regulatory Bodies, we would like to see states updating their national regulatory frameworks to cooperate, of course, way more, and to invest in these training programs. And all of this we would like to see within the umbrella or the ambit of AFCON, as I said, which has already done with constrained resources, has achieved significant successes. We would like to see all parties to the Pelindaba Treaty to honor their financial and political commitments to the AFCON. Regarding going forward then to the NPT review conference early next year, we would like the continent to use this 3-4 weeks that are ahead of it to really develop a strong position, to prepare working papers, and to go to the conference with great confidence of showing not only the benefits of what has been achieved, but also to drive a very hard bargain by reiterating the work that has already been done, and of course, the extreme developmental needs that the continent requires, and also the very important role that the peaceful use of nuclear energy can bring. Thank you so much for your attention.
Perfect. Knox, over to you.
Good afternoon. Apologies for the technical hitch and my part in that whole process. We have just received an overview from Professor Van Wyk that says the background. Now we would like to move on to Mr. Kamen Velichov to give us some aspects of the cooperation and governance in the SADC region. I cannot emphasize enough, but I don't want to steal Mr. Velichov's thunder, the importance of governance and cooperation, because we are relatively small grids when it comes to the power side of things, and we are small economies even for other aspects, but I don't think the story is about nuclear weapons at all. So let me hand you over to Mr. Kalecho, but let me give you a bit of background about him. Mr. Velichov is a senior program manager and diplomatic advisor at the International Science and Technology Center, where he oversees EU-funded projects on non-proliferation in Africa and Central Asia. Previously, he served as ambassador of Bulgaria to the Netherlands, permanent representative to the OPCW, ambassador to Thailand, and head of political section at the EU delegation to Kazakhstan. He was a visiting lecturer on foreign policy at universities in Kazakhstan, Belgium, Bulgaria, and the Netherlands. Over to you.
Thank you, Knox. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and The entire time slot allotted to me would not suffice to thank adequately SIA, its leadership and its staff. So I will limit myself to saying thank you to Professor Johansi van Wijk and Dr. Jarek Turjanski and the members of the SIA team who worked on the Norway-sponsored project Atoms for Development for the guidance and assistance in this with regard to this presentation that is actually based on findings under the ISTC implemented EU project in Southern Africa in support of the strengthening of the safety, nuclear safety and safeguards there. And I would begin probably with the statement that would be a commonplace observation to say that the SADC member states have adopted different approaches to nuclear energy and applications. This is a matter of fact that is also true for other state groupings in Africa and beyond. However, all of these Southern African countries need to improve their regulatory frameworks and policies to allow, inter alia, the safe and secure transportation of nuclear material within and out of the region. At present, SADC may provide a platform for nuclear governance synchronization by encouraging states advanced in their nuclear programs to engage in enhanced cooperation, which will also leave the doors open for others to join at a later stage. Consider these reasons. Half of the SADC member states have uranium deposits and intend to use them for export revenues on the condition of a market price range of $80 to $130 per kilo. Several SADC countries could access their uranium deposits: Botswana, Malawi, Namibia, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zambia. At an uranium price range above 130, the DRC and Zimbabwe could join the group. Also important data, Namibia is among the world's largest producers with 10.2% of the global uranium supply in 2019 coming from its open pit mines. South Africa is the only African state to operate a nuclear power plant and is considering a new build. Other SADC states, including Tanzania, Zambia, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, contemplate adopting nuclear energy within the next decade to meet their energy supply needs. And that's evident from the map courtesy of the Nuclear Business Platform in Africa. The advent of the small and modular reactors may prove to have a facilitating effect for the spread of nuclear power elsewhere in the region. Nuclear applications are found throughout Southern Africa in various industries. For instance, medical radiography is welcomed by communities as exemplified by the success of the Malawian cancer program. At the same time, there are rising public concerns over the use of nuclear energy in Southern Africa. This imbues urgency to the stakeholders' engagement, including civil society. On the other hand, professional organizations such as African Young Generation in Nuclear, South African Young Nuclear Professionals, African Women in Nuclear are capable to exert pressure on the governments in support of peaceful use. It is noteworthy that African Mining Vision put forward by the African Union Commission calls for a resource-based African industrialization and development strategy, emphasizing that uranium mining can be used to develop partnerships in the improvement of economic infrastructure. In Africa, uranium resources are mainly treated as a mineral commodity with little recognition of their contribution as a fuel in affordable and low-carbon electricity production. The African Union Commodity Strategy views Africa's uranium resources as a driver for economic development and the creation of a competitive African financial and capital market associated with the uranium nuclear energy value chain. The African Nuclear Weapon-Free Zone Treaty, the Pelindaba Treaty, requires all nuclear material facilities and equipment on the continent to be used exclusively for peaceful purposes and actively encourages such use. Owing to the variety of natural resources and development strategies, the SADC countries could be classified into 3 groups for the purposes of nuclear governance analysis and according to the priority attributed to nuclear matters. Of course, the standalone South Africa with its well-developed nuclear industry. Then come the 10 countries that have declared their interests in uranium mining and nuclear in general, and have established nuclear regulatory frameworks at various stages: Angola, Botswana, DRC, Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And then the 5 smaller countries and island states whose interest is mostly limited to other applications: Comoros, Eswatini, Lesotho, Mauritius, and Seychelles. South Africa has, as we all know and mentioned earlier today, advanced nuclear sector and comprehensive nuclear governance system that other SADC countries could theoretically tap as a reservoir of knowledge, skills, scientific and research excellence, and innovation. However, because of its long and incremental formation, other SADC states may find it difficult to directly imitate or internalize the South African nuclear architecture. RSA is the only SADC state that renders assistance in nuclear safety and security to other African countries. However, in practice, South Africa co-hosts training programs with the help of external non-African actors. South Africa acceded to the SADC Treaty back in 1994. In August 1996, it produced a foreign policy document titled Framework for Cooperation in Southern Africa. Basic transport infrastructure in the region did fall in the areas of interest, but safety on roads, including uranium transport, remained unaddressed. Then turning to the 10 countries comprising the second grouping, mostly all of them have established basic nuclear and radiation normative framework, usually stemming from an Atomic Energy Act. As a rule, a national nuclear regulator is the cornerstone of the regulatory institutional framework, often placed under a specified government ministry in charge of, say, healthcare, energy, environment, or even, in the case of the Seychelles, employment and civil status. The independent status of the regulator is often highlighted by a degree of administrative, but seldom budgetary autonomy. Some states have also established structures referred to as a Nuclear Energy Program Implementing Organization, the well-known NIPIOs. The 2020 National Nuclear Policy of Zambia provides such an example for a mechanism to promote the use of nuclear technology in sectors such as industry, agriculture, energy, health, mining, education, and environment. Among regulations to be introduced by regulators, transport-related rules occupy the most prominent place, as exemplified by the regulations elaborated, for example, by Iaea in Malawi. In SADC countries, the transport companies licensed to carry out shipments of uranium ore and radioactive materials usually bear responsibility for the safety and security of the convoys. Although they reportedly conduct incident preparedness drills, The inclusion of other stakeholders in the respective emergency response plans may increase the efficiency of such exercises. The island states are convenient place for the conducting of electronic monitoring of maritime transport that interfaces with land-based monitoring. For example, Madagascar and Seychelles host the Regional Maritime Information Fusion Center of Indian Ocean Regional Information Platform, known also as IORIS. I would limit myself by noting that as newcomers, small islands and island states have the opportunity to reflect international best practices and the experiences in their domestic regulations as they start from scratch. SADC Nuclear Regulators Network was an initiative to establish a specialized cooperative mechanism. It was founded in 2011 by a voluntary memorandum of cooperative agreement, and SADC protocol on nuclear and radiation safety was drafted with the intention to establish not less but a council of ministers, as well as NRN assembly and secretariat. Four main priorities of NRN found broad support, namely legal and regulatory frameworks, uranium mining and milling legacy issues, transportation safety, and information management. EU regional seminars in 2014 led to the launch of a project support to the Southern African states in nuclear safety and safeguards, which feeded the basic data for this presentation. Now, turning to the regional indicative strategic development plan of SADC. The infrastructure support for the regional integration is the most complex sectorial intervention of the RISDEP. Infrastructure sectorial governance is most likely the one to host for radioactive material safety measures. Furthermore, one should mention the harmonization of mining industry in the region, which is a necessity. There exists a need for institutional mechanism for coordination of nuclear safety and security policies at the SADC regional level, as currently there is none. It is necessary to create an appropriate SADC organ using the model of the Southern African Regional Police Chief Cooperation Organization, supervised by the Chiefs of Police Subcommittee of the Interstate Defense and Security Committee. Another point is the introduction of IT tools into the process that could facilitate harmonization and synchronization. One example is the information tracking system, which is a key component of the project I referred to, developed by a software company, Bulgaria. The ITS was conceived as a common web-based platform for data exchange and monitoring the transportation of uranium ore concentrate and other radioactive materials within and across borders of several Southern African states. Since 2020, the ITS has been already in use by relevant national entities in Malawi, South Africa, Tanzania, and Zambia. And in 2021, Mozambique, DRC, Zimbabwe, and Madagascar joined the network. This information tracking system is currently deployed in 8 SADC member states, and it allows exchange of relevant data in fast and consistent manner. Therefore, it is our hope that ITS will be preserved as a project output that requires maintenance. International transport is a major driving force for synchronization of regulation and policies. This is evident from many agreements that might be cited, and I would choose to do so with regards to the notable example of the Memorandum of Understanding between the DRC CNTRI and Zambia's Radiation Protection Authority. One possible way ahead in providing greater opportunities for interaction among SADC member states and others is the African Association of Competent Authorities, which is currently being set up. Conceived within the FNRBA at Working Group on Transportation, the aim of AACA would be to develop and promote a common regulatory approach. This highly specialized grouping, akin to a community of practitioners, may provide several durable outcomes, such as common understanding and common positions, statements, and approaches on emergency transportation-related preparedness, the monitoring and control of occupational radiation doses in the transportation process, and the justification of certain professional practices. On the basis of these thoughts that were shared and the presentation, the following conclusions seem appropriate. SADC member governments are planning to increase uranium mining and the peaceful use of nuclear applications. There is no doubt about it. Several countries are considering also adding NPPs to their energy mix. There is an increasing need of synchronization of existing and emerging regulatory frameworks, better networking of the SADC nuclear regulators, and development of human resources through introduction of information technologies. The transport of nuclear material and radioactive material requires a comprehensive approach and joint action by neighboring states. That is obvious. SADC may assist those in its member states that can and are willing to engage in enhanced cooperation in the harmonization of legal and institutional frameworks for greater levels of radiation safety. Well, I would say that we'd finish with some recommendations that SADC member states and Secretariat may read. First, elaborate transport safety guidelines and appropriate normative recommendations on proficiency in the regulation of transport of RAN. Install, use, and ensure sustainability of the information tracking system. Establish an open-ended informal group of stakeholders on the safe and secure transportation of radioactive material, and this should be done on regional level. Encourage member states to join the Association of Competent Authorities. Set up, if possible, a mechanism for AFCON SADC cooperation on nuclear matters, given that SADC is practically one of the sub-regions of AFCON's attention, including in safety and security of transportation of radioactive material. Create, if possible, a sort of interaction in a quartet cooperative mechanism between AFRA, AFCON, the FNRBA, and SADC. And finally, if possible, establish a SADC body, or rather office on nuclear energy and regulation for the future. The last contention, I'm sure, will make many of you think of me as being a dreamer, but let me remind you that in one popular song, the continuation of that conclusion was, I'm not the only one. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that. And thank you so much for keeping time. I don't know if there's any announcements that are coming from the organizers, but we are scheduled for a break until 5 minutes past 12. And then we will be listening to two eminent ladies. I'm looking forward to their presentations. Is there any announcement from the organizers?
Yes, Knox, thanks very much. I'm glad to see you were able to connect. Just one announcement. The Norwegian ambassador, who we said we were hoping to be able to connect with, is in fact ill today, so won't be able to join us. So we do send our best regards for a speedy recovery. But I think with the falling ill, there was a bit of there was a bit of a sort of a broken telephone this morning. So really sending her our best regards. But yeah, let's, as Knox said, let's break for a couple of minutes, and we'll reconvene at 12:05. And I really like the last comment that Kamen ended with, that he's not the only dreamer. But yeah, we'll see you all in a few minutes, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks.
Do we start now, colleagues?
Yes, I think so. I think not.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming back. Our next presenter is Ms. Lezani van der Merwe. Let me just give you a CV. Lezani is a nuclear expert working at the South African National Nuclear Regulator.
I'm very sorry, Knox, to interfere. I think you didn't get the private message that I sent you. We've actually had a change in schedule, and Professor van Wyk will be presenting the paper instead of Lezani.
Oh, okay. All right. No, that's fine. Sorry. Yes, I didn't get that message. Apologies. But nonetheless, I think I should just complete her credentials. She has got an MA in nuclear power plant engineering. Being an MA, I suspect is either from Cambridge or Oxford. Her research interests include nuclear power generation, SMR technology, and nuclear core design and analysis. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Knox. Thank you also for everybody that has joined us again. I just want to say, we are in this period of a pandemic, and not everybody is available to get to their commitments. So please bear with me as I present on behalf of our colleague, Lezani van der Merwe. So Lezani's paper has been published on our website. She has produced what we call our occasional paper, number 329, in September of this year. So Lezani set out to give us an overview of the international involvement in the African nuclear market. Now, as Carmen has indicated, is that we need a solid regulatory framework on the continent. Now, we have, of course, this architecture available, but as more countries are becoming more involved in various aspects of nuclear energy production, we will, of course, want to attract more international involvement, especially from the private sector. So in order to become major competitors, some countries have set themselves, as we have discussed this morning, on considering nuclear powers. Other ones are already using nuclear technologies for medicine, industry, and agriculture. And of course, as we have also seen, that there are various stages that some African countries are already in terms of the processes that they have engaged with. So let me move to an area where she focuses on exactly who is involved in the nuclear activities. So as Carmen has alluded to earlier, that the continent is of course very rich in terms of uranium. And this is of course an area that can attract and should attract more international involvement and investment. And of course that should be regulated for safety aspects also. In terms of the continent, we are familiar of the Egyptian program currently, which I think is the latest large-scale nuclear power plant development on the continent. And of course, there is a keen interest in what is happening in Egypt, but also as South Africa seemingly is set on the course to work towards also expanding the nuclear power production on the continent. So in South Africa, we are still in the process of public consultation, of course, for that. And I can imagine that there is already large focus on the continent and elsewhere on what South Africa is currently producing. So South Africa has, of course, a large market size in terms of the production of radioisotopes. And of course, this is also an area where there is considerable expansion for the continent. So what we see, for example, in terms of uranium production on the continent and of course, uranium processing, it seems like Algeria is already moving towards and have existing collaborations. Burundi, of course, has approached Rosatom in 2021 to help with the development. The DRC has in 2020 signed a memorandum of understanding also with Rosatom for nuclear training and education of the DRC scientific sector. We see Ethiopia has similarly signed an MOU with Rosatom in 2021. Gabon, if I could just go through some of the list just to give us an idea. Gabon has also in the process of remediating some of its mining sites and continue the maintenance and environmental monitoring of its uranium plants. Ghana is cooperating with the US, for example. Kenya has signed in 2015 an agreement with China to educate nuclear experts for future projects, but there was a recent report that says that Kenya has to reconsider what is happening because the financial impact of the pandemic has put tremendous pressures on the country. But of course, that will have we will have to have a look at how this plays out. In 2016, Kenya has signed an MOU with KEPCO, the Korean company, to develop nuclear energy on the continent. So we see that Nigeria has also signed with Rosatom an agreement for the construction and operation of a nuclear power plant. A similar agreement has been signed with Rosatom in 2020. Senegal has in 2018 signed an agreement with France. And of course, South Africa is the big question of where we will go forward. So these developments, of course, are only a few of the international involvement on the continent. And we are seemingly entering a period where more of these involvements will become available. So from our own side in South Africa, we have seen that there are, of course, a number of challenges, most notably the lack of infrastructure, the financial sources required for expansion of nuclear power programs, or then nuclear medicine, or the development of programs for science. Human resources remains a large question and challenge. We have seen that both Russia and China, for example, have signed educational agreements with some African countries, and the continent has also lost some of its expertise to other parts of the world. So what we see is that there is also the need for public buy-in in the development of nuclear program in whatever way. So there is also the importance need for education on the peaceful uses of nuclear technology. And we should be mindful that this education is not only required for the public at large, but also among politicians. And as I've indicated earlier, we need to have political buy-in at the highest level from states at the African Union level. And as SADC is also being the focus today for us in Southern Africa, that is also an area that we need to look at. And Carmen has given us the ideas of a dreamer, which I think is of course solid work to work on. We know that the commissioning of a nuclear power plant is basically also the establishment of a long-term relationship with the vendor, at least 2 generations, because it takes about 20 to 40 years. We also know that similarly, the decommissioning of a nuclear power plant is also a long-term relationship that can take 20 to 40 years. But South Africa is, of course, currently in terms of our public sphere, also talking about should the plant life of Koeberg being extended or not. Now, there seems to be a decision that have been taken to extend the operating life of Koeberg, but civil society is of course questioning that because of the safety and security concerns associated with that. Another aspect, another challenge that foreign and of course local involvement is facing on the continent is of course nuclear safety and security. And the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear and Radioactive Sources are of course a matter that should be promoted more on the continent. The submission of reports on the convention is still lacking on the continent, and this is an area where knowledge production as well as expertise in the preparation of these very important reports are very important. And this is an area where all of the nuclear governance infrastructure of the continent should become involved. And this is also an opportunity then for the continent to really make real on its commitments in terms of the NPT and of course the Pelindaba Treaty. Moving towards the conclusion, we have seen that there are, of course, the question of how do we finance any form of nuclear expansion programs. The Nuclear Industry Association of South Africa, of which Knox Nzimende is of course a member and of course a part. Knox, pardon me for not getting your full title correct at the spur of the moment. But NIASA has made a number of suggestions. Now, one of these could be government funding of the complete project with government-backed loan guarantees, but also supported by money from state-owned companies. Another suggestion from NIASA has been intergovernmental loans. Thirdly, corporate financing, financing by planned vendors, and special investment vehicles to fund these projects, and the so-called BOO structure, which is very much in line with some of the suggestions that have been picked up in South Africa. But there is still the perception that nuclear power plant development is not safe. And in terms of the global mind, and in terms of the anti-nuclear movement, there is still the legacy, the hangover of the events in 2011 in Japan associated with the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And of course, recently, the release of some of the water of the plant into the oceans have, of course, reawakened some of the international global civil society on that. So global nuclear vendors are, of course, keenly watching developments on the continent. We've seen that within the continent, China, most notably CGN and CNNC, have expressed their interest on the continent. France's EDF is operating in Senegal, Egypt, Cote d'Ivoire, and South Africa. Uranu, also from France, is involved in Gabon, Namibia, and Niger. Rosatom, I've outlined, is of course also involved. KEPCO in South Africa and Kenya, and of course the Americans through Westinghouse and NuScale also. These are just a few of the countries that are already involved, and it remains to be seen how African countries will, of course, experience going forward, but also what is the best deal that African countries can receive in terms of their future developments, but also the fact that these deals must be beneficial in the long run in terms of the achievement of not only the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2063 of the continent, but also to comply with the highest safety and security requirements that we have. So I would like to invite you to look at Lizani van der Merwe's paper that is available on the website. She also then, towards the end, look at some of the geopolitical challenges. One factor that she alludes to is, of course, the potential, and of course this is still unfolding before our eyes, of the Chinese Belt Road Initiative on the continent. It is one of the largest expansion programs, if not the largest, in terms of the global scope of infrastructure development, political influence, etc. But also for the continent, we have already seen the huge investments that the BRI have had in Kenya, and of course in Djibouti, linking also Ethiopia and Kenya. It remains to be seen whether the BRI will indeed have a strong focus on the eventual involvement of China, or the larger involvement of China in infrastructure development on the continent. Also, we are mindful of FOCAC, which is meeting in these days, and it remains to be seen what these commitments are. We are also mindful of the continent having these continent-to-continent relations, country-to-continent relations through various international polylateral agreements and engagements, and it remains to be seen what the continent can take out of that. Moving forward, and this is my view, not Lizani's, is going forward to the NPT conference, the continent, in my view, should also use the opportunity to say, once again, we need investment to fully expand and realize the very important aspect of the NPT, namely the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, but also to remind other signatories to the NPT of the very important obligation that is within the NPT, namely to share knowledge, equipment, and of course, technology. Going forward, that could, of course, in the long run, be to the continent's advantage, hopefully also to the international community. And thank you for your attention. And once again, apologies for the fact that the author of the paper could not present. And I hope I have been able to really convey the gist of her report. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. I think the paper captured some of the issues. In fact, there is a general thread about international cooperation, even from the previous paper. Thank you very much, Professor. Our next presenter is Isabel Bosman. Isabel Bosman completed her Master's of Arts in Political Science at Wits University in 2020 with a thesis focusing on biometrics and how it is changing the way we define the people. I'm very much interested in that, in inverted commas. In South Africa, our politicians tend to say our people. In America, they say American people. That's interesting. Her research interests include electronic voting and election techniques, biometrics, theoretical concepts, and the nexus between technology, politics, and energy governance as part of the role in the Atoms for Development project. And at the end of the, oh yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. So please, over to you, Isabel.
Thank you, Knox. I just want to confirm, is my presentation visible? And am I audible? Okay. Yeah, thank you for that kind introduction. So as Knox mentioned, my name is Isabel Bosman, and today I would like to present research findings from a paper by myself and Noel Stott published earlier this year, titled Nuclear Science and Technology Driving Africa's Development. So as the title suggests, we considered Africa's development framework, which is of course largely informed by the AU's Agenda 2063, adopted in 2013, and then the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, adopted in 2015. And then we sought to identify linkages between the peaceful use of nuclear science and technology and the realization of the objectives of these two agendas. We start from the premise that Africa is no stranger to nuclear science and technology, but has for decades recognized that nuclear science and technology has a tremendous developmental potential when applied peacefully. Our principal argument is that nuclear science and technology have significant development potential and can contribute directly to the realization of the objectives of Agenda 2063 and then the SDGs. Important in this context is the idea of sustainable development, which is essentially asking us to widen the scope and understanding of development beyond just its economic aspect, but to also include human capital, as then understood in the SDGs. Sustainable development has an economic aspect, a social aspect, and an environmental aspect. Just briefly looking at specifics in terms of the objectives of these two agendas that we see nuclear science and technology as most applicable to in terms of Agenda 2063. These are well-educated citizens and skills revolution underpinned by science, technology, and innovation, healthy and well-nourished citizens, environmentally sustainable and climate-resilient economies and communities, modern agriculture for increased productivity and production, and very importantly, the preservation of peace, security, and stability. Then in terms of the SDGs, in the interest of time, I'm not going to discuss these in detail, but these are just briefly goal number 2, zero hunger. Number 3, good health and well-being. Goal number 7, affordable and clean energy. Goal number 8, decent work and economic growth. And then goals number 13, 14, and 15, which kind of forms this cluster, climate action, life below water, and life on land. And then aligning also with Agenda 2063 is peace, justice, and strong institutions. We consider how nuclear science and technology is currently used in Africa in a peaceful manner. We look at these 4 broad clusters. So they are research applications, nuclear energy, and then the 2 main focus points of this paper, nuclear medicine and nuclear and agriculture. As presenters before me have also mentioned, South Africa is currently the only African state to operate a nuclear power plant, but other African states are considering it, and some are well on their way to achieve this goal. Nuclear research reactors are at present the primary mode of interaction with nuclear science and technology on the African continent. And these are used for different types of environmental, agricultural, and medical research, but they also play an important training and education function. At present, there are 10 nuclear research reactors in 8 African countries. I'm not going to discuss the table in detail, but just to briefly indicate these countries, they are Algeria, which is home to 2 nuclear research reactors. Then the DRC, which is home to 1, Egypt, which also has 2 nuclear reactors, and then Ghana, Libya, Morocco, Nigeria, and of course, South Africa. In terms of our 2 main focus areas, nuclear science and technology in the health sector in Africa, we look at radiotherapy, which is applied in the treatment of cancer. But of course, nuclear medicine has also been useful in managing diseases such as dengue, Ebola, and the Zika virus. But cancer is of particular importance in the African context, and then of course, where nuclear science and technology is concerned. Cancer is a significant global challenge, but it disproportionately affects low and middle income countries, many of which of course, are in Africa. So in 2020, 1,109,209 new cancer cases were recorded on the African continent, alongside 711,429 cancer deaths. Unfortunately, the continent has a severe shortage of radiotherapy machines, which significantly inhibits the ability of African countries to successfully respond to the increase in cancer cases. To put this into perspective, there are only about 385 radiotherapy machines on the continent. 60% of these are clustered together in these 3 countries, Egypt, Morocco, and South Africa. The Lancet Oncology Global Task Force for Radiotherapy for Cancer Control determines that the continent would have to acquire an additional 5,000 radiotherapy machines as early as 2035 if it has any hope of mitigating the rise in cancer cases and providing treatment to cancer patients. But a shortage does not mean that hope is lost. International bodies like the Iaea, the International Atomic Energy Agency, And the intergovernmental operation, not just between African states, but with other global states, can help Africa meet this target. Importantly, much of what the continent needs in terms of nuclear medicine is already present. One specific example is South Africa. This country is uniquely positioned in that it can share both its knowledge on nuclear energy and nuclear medicine. South Africa is the second largest global supplier of nuclear medicine and exports this good to 60 different countries. Then looking at nuclear science and technology in the agriculture sector in Africa, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN has determined that a 70% increase in global food production is necessary to meet the demands of the global population, which could reach 9.1 billion by 2050. The effects of climate change, however, make this challenge all the more complicated. But nuclear science and technology is positioned at an important intersection. It can address food security and it can address the effects of climate change. In the agricultural sector, at present, nuclear science and technology have been used in Africa to improve livestock nutrition, improve livestock reproduction, improve crops, very importantly, managing animal and plant pests and diseases, and also evaluate soil to improve its productivity. There is also an important link between the use of nuclear science and technology in agriculture and human health. Transboundary animal diseases and zoonotic diseases can disrupt human life in significant ways, as we know from experience. But Africa has responded to this risk through the use of nuclear science and technology and increased international cooperation. We look at these two specific projects. The first is the Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory, or VetLab network, which was established some years ago by the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Food and Agriculture Organization. It has had a positive impact on the African continent and was especially crucial in eradicating rinderpest. It has become a vital component for preventing, controlling, and eradicating transboundary animal and zoonotic diseases. And at present, 32 countries in sub-Saharan Africa form part of the VetLab network. The institutes in Botswana, Cameroon, Ethiopia, and Cote d'Ivoire are emerging as regional leaders in veterinary diagnostic using nuclear techniques. And then the most recent one is the Zoonotic Disease Integrated Action, or Zodiac project, also led by the Iaea and is established as a direct response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It has many positive future aspirations and is set to become a globally integrated network similar to VetLab for the early detection, monitoring, and management of zoonotic diseases, especially COVID-19 and similar variants of this disease that we might expect, Ebola, Zika, and avian influenza. Importantly, nuclear science and technology is only really able to make a positive difference if it is firmly rooted in a strong legal framework. And we see that Africa is a global leader in the legal commitment to the peaceful use of nuclear science and technology. This is evidenced in its commitment to international and continental treaties, but also continental nuclear regulatory and oversight bodies, which my colleagues have discussed before me. The continent is the world's largest nuclear weapons-free zone, and Africa has been committed to the ideal of denuclearization since 1964, with the signature of the Declaration on the Denuclearization of Africa. We consider two key treaties in this paper, the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, the NPT, and then the African Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone Treaty, or the Treaty of Pelindaba. In terms of the NPT, it promotes the peaceful use of nuclear technology globally, aims to prevent nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons technology from spreading. It encourages the peaceful use of nuclear energy and knowledge exchange between states, and is also high on Africa's agenda, with only 2 states having neither ratified nor acceded to the NPT. And then the Pelindaba Treaty, which establishes Africa as the largest nuclear weapon zone in the world, has been signed by 52 AU member states, ratified by 42, It promotes the ideals of nuclear disarmament, nuclear non-proliferation, the peaceful use of nuclear energy, and forms part of a wider continental strategy to implement the Common African Defence and Security Policy. As such, it is a vital part of the AU Peace and Security Framework, and signatories of this treaty agree not to conduct research on nuclear explosive devices or develop, produce, stockpile, possess, or control such devices. Importantly, linked to the Treaty of Pelindaba is AFCO, the African Commission on Nuclear Energy, which was also discussed in a previous presentation. It is established through the Treaty of Pelindaba to oversee states parties' compliance with their obligations. It is an active organization in promoting non-proliferation and disarmament on a global scale and offers support in nuclear training and research on the continent. Then another important element that we consider is the role of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. The IAEA actively promotes the safe, secure, and peaceful use of nuclear technologies on a global scale and works closely together with its various member states. Key areas of assistance in Africa have included education and training. This includes the training of specialist healthcare professionals, as well as training and education regarding safety and radiation protection of patients and healthcare workers. Cancer control programs, which, as we've seen from an earlier slide, is very important in the African context. Promoting nuclear medicine, especially radiotherapy and other oncological applications of nuclear medicine. And then importantly, the management of radioactive waste. This cooperation between African states and the IAEA spans 6 decades and has continuously centered on strengthening the continent's human and institutional capacity to use nuclear techniques in a safe and peaceful manner. Important to consider in engagement with the IAEA in the African context is the IAEA's Technical Cooperation Program. This was initiated by the IAEA to provide assistance to all of its member states with the safe, secure, and peaceful application of nuclear science and technology. At present, 45 African IAEA member states participate in the Technical Cooperation Program. But as with everything, there are some challenges in accessing, maintaining, and applying nuclear science and technologies on the continent. The contribution that nuclear science and technology can make to meet Africa's developmental aspirations, notwithstanding the potential risks that come with nuclear material, cannot be ignored. Some of the biggest risks include the possibility that nuclear and radioactive materials could fall into the hands of criminal or terrorist actors. This is a concern that has been raised by the AU previously. The creation of radioactive waste that is dangerous to human and animal health and the environment for thousands of years, and then the possibility that nuclear material may be enriched to create nuclear weapons. But these risks are manageable and are not indicators that the peaceful use of nuclear science and technology should not be further pursued. Alongside these risks, there are also a number of challenges which hinder the optimum application of nuclear science and technology. These include public skepticism about nuclear technology, which often results from weak public communication strategies on the part of African governments. The skepticism then in turn also lowers public support, making it more difficult to implement. The establishment of nuclear power programs are long-term undertakings and requires invested commitment from the planning phase through to the decommissioning of nuclear power plants. And then there are also issues of financial stability, which impacts on the ability to fully fund nuclear power programs and even nuclear research. Then just to conclude, nuclear science and technology does have, as our principal argument state, significant potential to contribute to achieving Agenda 2063 and the SDGs, and its present use and intended uses reflects those aspirations. And we see it as especially relevant in improving health and well-being and creating development that is environment and climate conscious. Above all, Africa's deep commitment to the peaceful use of nuclear science and technology aligns perfectly with its aspiration for peace and security, also enshrined in Agenda 2063. And then I will leave you with two of our key recommendations, since I would encourage you to read the paper to see the rest. We advise that national and continental public education programs on nuclear science and technology should be implemented as part of the planning phase for nuclear power programs and other areas where nuclear technology may be applied. And existing close cooperation with the Iaea in all forms of nuclear science and technology should continue, as more African states are prone to zoonotic diseases and food insecurity. Thank you.
Knox, just want to make sure if you're there. Apologies, colleagues. Maybe our moderator has just stepped away from his laptop for a minute or two, but thank you very much to my colleague Isabel for the great presentation. Much appreciated. And of course, all of these presentations are available on SIA's website. So if you just go to sia.org.za, you will see that we've got a section of thematic research. Under that thematic research, you need to click on governance and then further on nuclear governance. And then you can see all of these and the previous papers that we've published. And let me hand over now back to our moderator, Noxem Sebenzi, who will handle the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. We've reached the stage now where we've got an opportunity for questions and answers. There is a couple of questions that were written in. I don't know how we should approach these, or should we ask for more Q&A questions? There is definitely
Knox,
one.
it's really up to you. I mean, you're welcome to pose the questions to relevant participants that have already been asked, and I'm sure that while they're answering, we'll get some more questions in the Q&A.
Okay. Let me go straight to the question that was put in. Oh, the previous questions, okay, answered. The one question was where exactly, from Rolf Pretorius, where exactly does Africa and other than South Africa stand in terms of having the expertise to deal with nuclear safety and management issues at the moment? In other words, to be able to manage all the technical issues regarding nuclear energy generation without relying on developed countries. Any volunteer to answer this question?
I'll try and add to the existing answers that you have provided, Knox, and I see Prof. van Wyk has also answered. I think that in terms of, standing on its own feet and no longer requiring international cooperation in this field is some way off. But that's not to say that we should discard international cooperation altogether. As we can see with collaboration with the Iaea, this is beneficial not just for the African continent, but for the world at large. And I think if Africa wants to emerge as a global leader in the nuclear science and technology field, it's going to have to rely on some forms of international cooperation. And then, of course, just the simple fact that there are countries with more experience in dealing with things like nuclear waste and even the building of nuclear research reactors, and that initial cooperation will be vital in terms of learning and training and building our own human capital on the continent, so that we can then in future rely more internally and cooperate with African states, rather than always looking immediately outside of the African continent. I hope that helped a bit.
Yeah, if I might just add for what is worth, the international cooperation is not limited to it's not just Africa or developing countries that use international cooperation.
Absolutely.
I was talking to a French nuclear expert who was telling me that the French were involved and are still involved with the Chinese nuclear program. The Chinese and the Russians are cooperating in building nuclear power plants. So the idea of international cooperation should be encouraged rather than discouraged. But I think the concern may be the dependence, the unequal dependence that Africa may have towards developing countries, which may have some connotations to perhaps past colonial relationships, but that needs to be managed. Thank you very much. The next question is from Anonymous. It says there's been no discussion of the economics of nuclear energy versus alternatives, nor of the disposal of waste. Coincidentally, there are no critical voices from civil society on the program. Why is this? SAIA norms of discussions and debate closer to those of the West or of China and Russia? Any volunteer here?
Knox, maybe let me jump in as somebody who put together this program and answer this question. Of course, I think that my colleague Joansi will also be interested in jumping in. I see that she's provided a very thorough and comprehensive answer. I think that what we try to do at Science, certainly what we try to do on this project, is to have a balanced view of nuclear energy. It's a discussion that is often very polarized, and sometimes you see a paper or you see an interview with an expert, and it's very much one way. It's either pro or against, and there's sort of no middle way. So certainly what we've tried to do with the papers that we've produced internally in-house, but also externally with our commissioned authors, is to try to maintain a more balanced point of view, explain that there are benefits to using nuclear energy in Africa, but then there are, of course, also cons, and we have included them in all of our papers. And I think that the overall direction and argument that our program tries to make is that there are instances in which nuclear energy on the African continent makes economic, environmental, and socio development sense. So that's certainly what we try to convey as the key message on the program. But the person that posted the question is, of course, welcome to get hold of me or one of my colleagues if he or she would like to engage further or submit an abstract that could be considered for a future publication. Thank you. Joansi, I'm not sure if you would like to make an addition to my answer.
Yes, thank you very much. I really like that question because it is, of course, very much absent from the overall discussions, not only in South Africa, but on the continent. We have previously, as a team at some other webinars, we have talked about the fragmented nature of African civil society that is critically questioning and engaging on nuclear energy. This is a matter that, of course, leaves the room or at least the field open to sometimes making generalizations about the position or the support or the opposition to nuclear energy on the continent. It is a very important aspect also because it is also a test for democracy and democratic practices on the continent. These are large-scale investments with significant security implications, safety implications, financial implications. Effectively, for example, building a nuclear power plant is engaging into a long-term relationship, 20, 40 years, 2-3 generations that will not only pay for it, but could also potentially benefit from it. So how do we go about it? It is important that there should be a civil society discussion on this. And this is, in my view, where the African peer review mechanism can come in. As it stands, the African peer review mechanism is supposed to be the result or engage at least civil society. My thinking, or at least my experience, and here Stephen Groot and Jarek Tulianski, who has written a book on that, could perhaps also indicate whether that is part of the peer review mechanism. In other words, the civil society engagement on these issues. We know that the APRM process is, of course, highly politicized, but that could be one avenue to engage with civil society, at least on a continental level. The other aspect where critical voices could come in is in engaging on the reports that governments have to submit in terms of the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials, and also in terms of country reports that go onto the Iaea website, for example, in terms of its country reports. So even in South Africa, civil society is not effectively engaging in those reports that are submitted. The NNR, National Nuclear Regulator, has published these reports on their website. Obviously, not all of them, but this is an area where, from the regulator side, from government side, there should be communication, and it is really a struggle to get some documentation to conduct research. So, as I said in the answer box, I have tried to look at some of the responses from civil society in South Africa to nuclear expansion plans. Now, that in itself is tricky because one needs to have an open mind on whether these arguments from both sides are really solid. Are they not ad hominem? Are they really sounded and grounded in science and, of course, in ethical principles? So on both sides, whether you are pro or against. So this is an element that I'm trying to engage with, albeit not very far in progressing. But finally, there is another engagement that we also need to look, is that there are international organizations that are doing very good work, academics that are do very good work elsewhere, that I think that we can take a lesson from. And this is hopefully a discussion on civil society engagement, on energy futures of the continent that we should have. And please, as Jarek said, please share your ideas with us so that we can also learn and, of course, contribute to the discussions on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. There's another question from Professor Iaea Osman. What are the commitments from African Union on the continental nuclear science and technology development similar to European Union involvements in terms of funding programs to the member states? Any volunteer here?
Chairperson, if I can come in again, if you allow me.
Yeah, sure.
The African Union, from my side, is really for the first time really taking the nuclear agenda seriously, but not as much as is envisaged in the Pelindaba Treaty, in my view. And also having spoken to actors in this environment, that it seems like nobody in Addis Ababa necessarily picks up the phone and answers when one calls. So right now, in terms of funding is severely limited. I think that the AFCON's director, who is present, I see in the meeting, Mesoud Balomer, may want to share on this, some more on this. We also know that the African Union, in terms of its budget, is very much under pressure. And another aspect is the implementation of the Kagame reforms, if I can call it that, the reform process and the transformation that is currently taking place at the AU, which is, from all reports, of course, important in terms of the objectives, but it is in a way also slowing down a lot of decisions and processes. And so there is a period before all of these things will stabilize, before we can really have a renewed discussion on the continent's commitment to these matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. If there are no other questions.
Dr. Velishkov has his hand up. I think he wants to contribute.
Oh, okay, sure. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for noting that request for intervention, because I find the last question, and not only this one, but also others referring to international experience vis-a-vis home acquired experience and knowledge, very pertinent ones. And I wanted to underline strongly that there is no contradiction whatsoever from external assistance, between external assistance and the African ownership of the process. With regards to that, there are many examples, and I wanted to quote, for instance, the usefulness of what is termed in international cooperation practice to be the study visits. Study visits for SADC member states, for instance, were organized to Finland, one of the lead countries in nuclear safety, by the way, and provision of examples in that regard, as well as to Kazakhstan, again, a leading country in terms of the not only uranium mining and exports, but also in developing safety and security techniques. While saying that, I have to point out that African partners should not shun away from such an opportunities offered to see once rather than hear 100 times what is in place. And I believe that from this perspective, European Union sponsored programs could be very effective. True, Isabel was placing the accent on Iaea guidance, and of course it is the international organizations that provide standards for many topics. But what is interesting to note that some of the technical assistance programs that Iaea, for a number of reasons, could realize might not be sufficient in scope. For example, the training of a particular set of experts could be limited to a handful of people for a country with much larger necessities and requirements. So in addition to that, there are many opportunities that could be used on a bilateral basis within the EU, African Union framework of a program for cooperation and partnership, because the European example is adequate. And I now move to the second question. Rather, it implies the existence of European example in this regard, namely, what are the reform processes supposed to bring about in terms of greater degree of nuclear safety and the spread of nuclear safety and security culture. I believe the European example points exactly what earlier we were trying to talk about, namely that countries in the EU that are advanced and interested in cooperation under the what used to be the Euratom arrangement initially, they're welcome to do so, despite the, for various reasons, reluctance of other member states to embrace such form of cooperation, on the condition that this enhanced cooperation should remain open for all. And that's exactly what I believe is applicable for Africa as well, because otherwise we will get lost into the vicious circle of whether universality, uniformity should apply when we calculate the least denominator among African countries. And then, of course, there will be the loss in terms of the aspirations of the leading community and set of countries. So that's why I raised my hand to vote, not for the third way in between, but for a way that is African one, specified by the circumstances of the continent and mindful of the existing international lore, the lore of existing international experience and standards.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I guess we have come to the end of our session or webinar. I would like to thank the South African Institute of International Affairs for organizing this. And I would like to express the appreciation from the South African Institute of International Affairs, the Norwegian Foreign Affairs Office for facilitating or for funding Atoms for Africa project. Thank you very much for attending this seminar, this webinar. I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Anzi. Thank you, everybody.
Greetings to your wife. Greetings to the families also. Thank you.